Welcome to Construction Genius. My guest today is Todd Dawalt. He is the founder of Construction Leading Edge. He has 25 years of experience in the construction industry. He understands the challenges leaders face. From managing $300 million worth of projects to owning his own business, he knows what it's like to deal with operational chaos. And through his failures and successes, Todd has learned what it takes to run an effective organization and maintain personal freedom. And today we're going to talk about how to recession-proof your business. We're going to talk about how recessions happen, not just from a macroeconomic perspective, but from a microeconomic perspective, and how construction companies can prepare for recessions by doing practical things like building up cash reserves and stopping profit bleeds. This is an hour-long conversation, and you're going to get tremendous amount of value from every single aspect of this conversation because recessions happen, whether from a macro basis or a micro basis, and you need to be ready for it. This podcast episode is going to help you to be ready for those challenges. So make sure you are taking careful notes if you're not driving and enjoy my conversation with Todd. Thanks for listening today. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Todd, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure to have you on the show. I've just got to let my audience know that you're one of my inspirations for starting my podcast. And when I started it, I looked at yours and I'm like, man, I want to be like Todd when I grow up. So it's a privilege to have you here.
I appreciate that.
You know, we're recording this at the end of 2022. It sounds like people have been trying to talk us into a recession for a while. It's been teetering. We know recessions come. The last one, really serious one, was in 2008. But what I'd like to do is just really talk about strategies that contractors can put in place to ride through recessions successfully. So what have you seen successful contractors do during recessions to thrive?
Great question. But before we jump into a recession, let's talk about what a recession, or before we jump into what to do when a recession hits and how to thrive, let's talk about what a recession is, because there's the economist definition, which is 2 quarters of declining GDP or whatever it is. And yeah, there's lots of talk about we are in a recession, we're headed to a recession. Is it going to be a soft landing? Is it going to be a hard landing, et cetera? But to me, a recession is a significant hit to a company. So that significant hit could be because of a global recession or a widespread recession, or it could be because you lost a key employee. A business could be thrown into a recession when it gets hit with a lawsuit, or when the owner gets sick or passes away, or maybe on a smaller scale, when you have a large contract cancel that you planned on putting a lot of resources into over the next 6 months or a year, or you lose a key client. So there are a lot of different definitions for a recession. So the key is there may be some people who think, all right, you know what? We're never going to have another 2008 again. And I hope you're right. Personally, I don't think we're in another 2008. I don't think we're headed for that. Things are very different. But the reality is, it's not a matter of if you'll have a recession, if we're talking about a recession being some sort of significant hit to a company. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So it's going to happen. You're going to lose a contract. You're going to lose a customer. A key employee is going to leave. Something's going to happen to the owner. It's very likely to happen. So we need to understand we need to be ready for that. We need to have recession-proof businesses. It's really the business owner's job to war game for this stuff, right? That's what the military does. They train constantly to be ready when this stuff happens. They don't, unfortunately, our military doesn't start getting ready when things go sideways. So with that being said, how do we prepare for a recession? Prepare for it. How do you thrive? Was that the question?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because you make an important point. You can spend all day reading the newspaper or surfing Twitter or whatever and hear all the macro news. But really, when it comes down to it, we feel recessions on a micro level. And you well put it, a recession can happen to a business because of a significant hit. And so When you start talking about that, it's interesting because from a macro level, we don't feel like we have a lot of control. But from a micro level, as you're describing those specific issues that cause a significant hit to a company, my question to you is about the things that I control and I don't control. So you said things like key employee, lawsuit, an owner getting sick or dying, a large contract canceling, losing a key client. Which of those there, or any others that you're thinking about, which are the ones that contractors have the most control over that they most often neglect and therefore get nailed by that significant event?
Which one do they most often neglect?
And they have the most control over?
I would say the one they have the most control over is when a large contract cancels or gets delayed, because we don't have a lot of control over when someone gets sick or key employees. We probably do have some control over key employees leaving. But what I found is that a lot of people are hooked on hopium when it comes to their contracts, like this drug, hopium. They're hoping that, this contract's going to go forward. Everything's moving. And the reason they're so hopeful is because they need it to happen so desperately. We don't have anything else going on. We have all these people who are going to be sitting on the sidelines. So we hope it's going to happen and ignore the red flags. And then we get the email or get the phone call. Hey, this project, it's not going to happen. It's canceled. And there are a lot of things we could have done. Like one of the best strategies is to have a full pipeline of work. But in any circumstance, one of the best strategies is to set a go, no-go date on a project. Whether it's a big project or a small project, when we get into trouble is when we find out the project has canceled or is delayed, and we find it out too late to do anything about it. So we find out 2 weeks before we're supposed to mobilize that the project has been delayed or canceled. Then it throws everything into chaos. We need to set a go, no-go date for that project that says 90 days, 6 months prior to the start of work, we need to have these things in place so that you have time to recover and pivot, go in a different direction, go after something else when you have time to respond. So setting that no-go date key, and I've seen it so many times. I've done it personally because we need it so bad. We don't want to face the reality that, hey, this thing may not happen and we're going to have to deal with the consequences of it.
Okay, so this is that go, no-go date. Is that prior to any contracts being signed and things like that, where you have it on your radar? You might have in some form of a backlog, but you haven't made contractual agreements. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Typically what happens is there's talk about a project. Hey, we're moving forward. It's in the pipeline. Maybe we have a pre-construction agreement. Maybe they're advancing the design and we're involved in the design process. The contract hasn't been signed yet. And we're hopeful that it's going to happen, that it's going to convert into a contract. So we just hope and that it happens, and we go past these checkpoints and ignore these red flags and delays on the front ends of projects. And we just hope it's going to happen. So the key is to say at the beginning, to set out, these are the points at which we need to make decisions. If we don't have a signed contract by this date, then we're going to stop. This is as far as we're going to go on this project until we set up these if-then statements, basically. If we don't have a contract at this point, we will pull the plug. If we do, we will continue. If we get to this point and maybe we have a signed contract, but we don't have a notice to proceed, or we have a signed contract, but they haven't issued for construction documents or something like that, or they haven't issued their furniture design or something. But there are these if-then statements, the things that are outside of our control. If we continue to discharge forward, hoping that things will resolve themselves, I've seen it so many times, contractors just get left holding the bag and left in the lurch and basically in a mini recession with this giant hole in their schedule that they have to somehow fill up.
That's interesting because I think what happens then often is, let's say I have this ideal job with an ideal client that I thought doesn't go, and I am left with that hole in my schedule. Then I start taking on jobs that really I shouldn't be doing just to keep my guys busy. And that sort of compounds the effect of not being disciplined in terms of how I address the first job.
Precisely. And we end up in reactive mode, scrambling, trying to take whatever we can get. in that situation right now, you could probably look upstream and look back in the past, and you very likely ignored some red flags that because you were hopeful, you hoped things would get better.
Let's pivot a little bit and talk about that key employee, because it's funny, I was chatting with a couple of days ago and they were telling me about how their employees keep leaving. They have a core group of guys, but they can't grow the business because they bring on 3 and 3 leave. And I said, there's an old saying that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their managers. So are people quitting you? And he didn't think so. We're going to explore that a little bit more. But in terms of key employees, what are the main reasons, other than I'm leaving town kind of thing, that people are quitting and going to another company and I'm losing that key employee?
I think there's a lot of truth to that statement. People, they don't leave companies, they leave managers, they leave bosses, they leave owners. That has certainly been the case in my career. In many cases, I've left good teams and meaningful work because of the business owner or the manager. But the reasons that I found that people leave, say, directors of operations, project managers, superintendents, estimators, people in that pretty much in all capacities, they leave because of chaos and stress. And one of the things that I found that causes the most stress for people is feeling like they're out of control. When they feel like their destiny and when their destiny is outside of their control, in other words, when they don't have autonomy, when they don't have control over their day-to-day, then that causes a lot of stress. And people tend to leave in those situations. So I read an interesting study a few years ago, and this group studied effective stress on Navy SEALs, forward operators, special operators who are kicking in doors and killing bad guys and raiding houses, and compared that to the stress level of people who were back at headquarters, who were in a combat area, but back inside the wire, mechanics, people like that. But they were still, these people were under the threat of, say, mortar attacks or things like that. What was interesting was the stress level was higher in the people who were away from the front line, the people who were inside the wire, because there was this threat, but they had no way of doing anything about it. They had no control, no influence over what was happening. Whereas the forward operators, the guys who were kicking in doors, believed they could do something about it. So this feeling of helplessness and this loss of control causes a lot of stress. And that's one thing. And then just chaos of duplicate efforts and people stepping on each other's toes and lack of clarity about what their role is. They don't know what winning looks like. Just lack of clarity about what am I supposed to be doing? Am I winning? Am I doing my job? Am I doing a good job? That's a big one. And maybe this ties into it, but it's just a lack of recognition and appreciation. I believe recognition goes a long way. People will run through walls to get an attaboy or an attagirl just to hear a little bit of positive reinforcement. So those are some of the reasons that I believe people leave good companies, is because just lack of control and chaos and just a lack of recognition.
Let me ask you about this sense of helplessness. What role do you think creating and communicating clear career paths for people has in giving folks a sense of control and even a sense of what winning looks like for them individually and a sense of greater contribution?
I think it has everything to do with it. I think it's huge. I think it's one of the biggest problems out there. I heard a statement a few months ago that people lose hope when they run out of future. So if people are bailing out of a company, in a sense, maybe they've lost hope. And it could be because they don't see the future. Either they don't see the company having a future, or they don't see that they have a future with that company. They just don't see it. So they go somewhere else. Nobody wants to waste a few months or a few years of their life just in a dead-end job. It's not going anywhere. So I think it's incredibly important to have a clearly defined career path, even visualized. It says we work with accountability charts in our business and with our clients. And here's the accountability chart. This is where you'll start. And it provides clarity for a lot of things.
Yes.
Everybody wants clarity. So having a clearly defined accountability chart provides clarity for employees, This is what your career path looks like. This is what winning looks like for you today in this role. This is what you need to do to get to the next level. And it provides clarity to everybody. This is what each function and each role is responsible for. So you don't have to mess with it because they're responsible for it. It also means you can push things back on people they're trying to get you to do their job. It just provides these clearly defined lanes and just eliminates so much confusion, provides a lot of clarity.
Sometimes I think owners are reluctant to communicate clear career paths because they fear that by doing so, they overpromise to people. Or this person hasn't earned anything yet, so I don't want to put in their heads that they could potentially get a deeper point in my company. Is that a fear you often run across with owners?
Yeah, there are a lot of fears like that. That's a really good one. It's completely illogical if you think about it, right? But let's just expose that fear, which is I'm afraid if I clearly outline what my expectations are, and this is what winning looks like, I'm afraid of what will happen if they win. That's completely irrational, right? Because if you're a business owner, if you lay out these expectations the right way, and if they win, that means you're winning. Everybody's winning. So I think that's one of the fears is what if they win? What if I lay this out and what if they do it? Then they're going to come to me asking for money and I'm going to have to do this and all of this sort of thing. The other fear is what if I go through this and I put these expectations on my current team and Sally over here has been with me for 15 years and Jake started with me 20 years ago when it was just me in a truck. What if I lay these expectations out and they don't rise to the occasion? What if I have to let them go? What if I've outgrown these people who've helped me get to where I am today? That's a big one. And then the other one that I find is what if I set these expectations out and I build this, and what if I bring in high level talent and they realize that I'm a fraud and they're like, what the hell are you doing? You have no business running a company. What are you doing? So this imposter pops up. So what happens is there are all these what ifs that could happen. So what do? We're like, you know what? We're just not going to do anything. And we'll just do the same thing. We'll deal with the same level of chaos, the same frustration one more day, because we know what that feels like. We don't know what this other thing feels like. So we're just going to do the same thing one more day and put it off.
So let me ask about the chaos. What is the main source of chaos in construction businesses in your experience?
It's everywhere. So what that chaos looks like is details falling through the cracks. Oh, I thought you were going to order this material. Let's just take that for an example. It's time to install. This is the first thing that pops into my head. It's the superintendent says, hey, boss, project manager, we need to get these pavers installed in this courtyard. Okay. Oh, nobody ordered those pavers yet. Oh, we didn't find a subcontractor for those pavers. So now we jump into scramble mode. And somebody has to drop what they're doing. Multiple people have to drop what they're doing to react. This problem that's been sitting there for weeks or months, but we didn't find out about it until somebody turned the page, realized, oh crap, there's this giant gap there. So that's just one example. But really what I found is the number one root cause of chaos in construction businesses is what I call the just enough to start thinking trap. JETS, just enough to start. We're going to do just enough to get this estimate out the door, put some plug numbers in there, some allowances, some we'll figure that out later in there, just enough to get a contract signed, just enough to get a PO issued, just enough to get the trade started, just enough to whatever it is. Sometimes it goes all the way back on the owner's side. I've seen it. Just enough to get a lease signed, just enough to get a GC on board, and fast tracking projects. Fast tracking projects is a recipe for disaster. The just enough to start trap is the root cause of so many problems, and it just sets off this chain reaction of figuring things out. And that is the number one root cause of problems on job sites, whether they are tiny handyman jobs or $100 million high rises. It's doing just enough to start. Does that make sense?
Yep. No, it makes total sense. So, because that's something that happens all the time. And like I said, on small projects, large projects, someone's listening to this and Todd, I get that. But dude, sometimes we just got to get out there and get going. So what do I do about that?
You have to make a choice. Either continue with this level of chaos, just keeping up with it, just keeping up with the level of chaos, or commit that we're tired of this. This is not sustainable. Understand the cost of inaction. This is why we lose people. This chaos can be tracked back to just enough to start. So you need to connect it in your mind. I had a client say this as we were talking about chaos. He said, my biggest fear is that the team is going to implode. And he brought up a really interesting point. My employees may be able to put up with it, but I am scared to death that their wife is going to say, that's enough. Like this 70-hour-a-week stuff, you always being on your phone at night, I've had enough. Something has to change. So his biggest fear wasn't that his people were going to leave, but that their spouse was going to say, that's enough. Something's going to happen. And then what happens? When you lose a key person, the workload's still there, but it now has to be carried by one fewer person. And then it can start to just implode and fall apart.
Let's think through this idea of a recession. And obviously recessions can happen not because of macro trends, but micro trends. But let's for a moment think about when a macro recession hits, and let's say in your geography, with your type of work, there's a genuine downturn. What do successful companies do to exploit the opportunities that come up when a general recession hits?
Well, number one would be that they have already prepared for it, right? So they know it's coming. And frankly, when a recession hits, it's not the ideal time to start thinking, how can we look at this as an opportunity? So that needs to happen years in advance. So that needs to happen when things are really good. Step one is when things are really good, you should be thinking, all right, how can we capitalize on the next recession? There's a book called Rock the Recession, written by one of the authors is Jonathan Slane. And in that book, there's a quote from the president of, was it Lithco? I think it's the president of Lithco Contracting, one of the biggest concrete contractors in the country, Rob. I can't think of his last name. Rob is the president's name. But there's a quote in there where Rob said, I can't wait until the next recession hits. Now, that's crazy. Why would any contractor say, I can't wait until the next recession hits? Well, it's because what Rob did in the last recession was he saw it as an opportunity. He was ready. And his company went out and they grew their team when everybody else was letting their people go. They picked up market share. They picked up equipment at a discount. They may have acquired other businesses. So he couldn't wait for the next recession because it was a huge opportunity, like buying stocks when the stock market is low. It's the same way. So step number one is be ready, plan for it.
Let me ask you a question about that. Let me just ask you a question about the being ready. When you said, so you're picking up key employees, you're picking up equipment, other aspects, the first thing that popped into my head there is that you got to have some cash on hand. So what are some of the smart strategies that contractors use when times are good to make sure that their treasure chest is fat and they're not frittering away their cash on stupid stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. The goal is to build a war chest of cash.
How much cash on hand should a contractor have? Like how many months, let's say? What do you think, Todd?
I don't pretend to be a financial advisor or a CFO, but imagine if you had enough cash on hand to pay all of your overhead for 6 months, pay all of your people. You don't have any revenue coming in, but you could cover your overhead for 6 months. That would be a really good position to be in. So how do you do that? You avoid the roller coaster effect of, wow, things are great. I should reward myself. Maybe the way I think about it is stewardship, right? It really is a stewardship mindset. And you need to think about money as a resource and not a reward, right? Money as a resource, not a reward. If you think about money as a reward, what happens? You can look around. The people who see money as a reward, as soon as it comes in, they spend it. They're buying boats and houses and like all of this stuff with FTX that's going on. This guy had all this money, billions of dollars, and he clearly saw money as a reward. He's buying hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate for his team and his parents and all this just pissing this money away. That's a prime example of what that looks like. So it really goes back to your mindset about money. This money is a resource. The cash you have is a resource to help you do something else. I think it all starts with that mindset, knowing that, hey, hard times are coming. Money is a resource. We need to store up the resources to be ready.
Hey, this is Eric. I hope you're enjoying my conversation with Todd and you're getting some key insights on how to recession-proof your business. Just a quick heads up. I have a book. It's called Construction Genius: Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS Leadership, Strategy, Sales, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. I encourage you to go out to Amazon and purchase a copy for you and your leadership team. And then what you do is you go through each one of the chapters. There's 12 chapters. Go through a chapter at a time and discuss it with your leadership team, because I've packed in a number of strategies that you can use right away to help your construction company grow and prosper. So grab yourself a copy of the book, grab one for your leadership team, and take advantage of all the great strategies that are in this book. Now back to my interview with Todd. By stewardship, just give us a definition of what you mean by stewardship, because I think it's not a word we use all the time.
Yeah, so stewardship, the way I see it personally, like a Christian guy, so the way I see it is, this is like, my business is not my business. I am the steward of my business. And it's my job to take care of this. It's been given to me to steward. So I need to be a good steward. My job is to care for this thing and grow it to the best of my abilities and be ready to pass it off. So I heard a great interview with, there's a guy who has a podcast about family businesses. And he studied incredibly wealthy families that have maintained their wealth for 3, 4, 5, 12 generations. And they thought differently about it. They had a stewardship mindset. And it was the key to generational wealth being passed on. Because what typically happens is the first generation makes the wealth, the second generation comes in, and then the third generation looks the typical cycle. So the answer is to look at it as, all right, we have this responsibility to steward this business or this wealth, or whatever resources we have, to pass it on to the next generation. So that's what I mean by stewardship.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Let's assume that I've come into a recession and my war chest is solid, my employees are solid, but my particular line of business, the particular niche I'm in, is a little shaky. And if I'm opening my eyes, I know it's going to create some challenges in the next 12 to 18 months. What advice do you give to contractors when they are looking to go sideways, go into another niche or something like that? What steps should they take when they're thinking about new niches, perhaps new locations, new clients? How do you address that?
Yes, that's a great question. So there was a study done by the Harvard School of Business and several other universities. They studied companies that came out of the last recession and how they did. So one of the findings was, if you're in a recession, the tendency is to go in different directions. But one of their findings was the companies who did that did not fare well. So during a recession is the time to focus on core competencies. Do more of what's working. This is maybe a little counterintuitive, but it's not the time to go use your powder to try to make other stuff happen. It's time to double down on core competencies. Do more of what's been working for you.
I get the logic there, but what if my core competency is doing TIs in commercial spaces and in the Bay Area, and Facebook and all the tech companies are now doing hybrid work and that TI work has just gone away? What do I do then?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I think my advice would be to put on your business development hat. And there are two approaches to business development. There's what I call the guy with a hammer approach. And the guy with a hammer approach says, hey, we do this type of work, and I'm going to go try to find that work. So imagine this guy walking around with a hammer, looking for nails, looking for specific nails, and he can't see anything else. He's just looking for nails to drive, right? The other approach that works better, especially when you run out of nails to drive, let's say that commercial TI contractor who worked with tech companies and that suddenly goes away, would be to open up the toolbox and say, hey, we have a team of people who can solve problems. Let's go find some other problems to solve. Let's go find customers we like to work with. Let's go find some problems that exist that we can solve and can be profitable. So be a variety of different things.
So that's interesting there, because I have guys and gals on my team who've been working on a particular type of project. That project goes away, but in their history, they've had success in other niches. And so by focusing on core competencies, I'm thinking about the core competencies that my people have that perhaps they haven't been focused on. And then I can open up that toolbox and utilize those tools that have been dormant just because there hasn't been a need for a while. Is that something that makes sense?
Yeah. And so what that could be is it's very possible that your market has declined, but there's demand elsewhere. Say multifamily housing. It could be a big opportunity. Maybe you have an estimator and a pre-construction coordinator sitting on the sidelines, twiddling their thumbs. There's very likely, I know a company right now who's planning on staffing up and hiring 10 or 15 people. You may be able to outsource your people on a contract basis to help solve their problem, keep your people busy, and not lose them in the process. So one of the things we learned during COVID is people can work from just about anywhere. So it's very possible that you could go find a demand somewhere else in your exact or very similar industry and people busy that way.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it would seem then that to prepare for a recession, I not only have to get my cash situation straight and, like you said, steward my money as opposed to spend it or look at it as a reward, but then also to really be fully aware of the tools that I do have at my disposal. In other words, the types of projects my folks have worked on in the past or the types of capabilities they have, so that when those opportunities pop, I can see them and I can exploit them and take advantage of them.
Absolutely. And one of the other, I mentioned that study that studied companies that came out of the recession. One of their findings was one of the best things you can do to prepare for a recession, to recession-proof your business, if you will, is to focus on your organizational structure, focus on your team. So clarifying roles and responsibilities like we talked about, but also cross-training your team. And to your point, really understanding your team's capabilities. What capabilities do you have? It would be good to know that up front to be more resilient and be more flexible and agile is probably a good term for that. So it's a lot of the resilience of your business will come from your people. And a lot of people overlook this. They think one way people look at it is when things go down, they look at their employees as a liability. And the reality is their people are their biggest asset at all times, but especially during a downturn. And they really need to tap into that asset of their people to make it through.
One of the challenges I know a lot of contractors have is actually letting go of people. And they tend to keep people much longer than they should, even when times are good. When times are bad, it's one of the things I'm always encouraging my guys to do is, okay, so you don't have as much work on the books. That means you have an opportunity to look at your roster and maybe move some of those C players along. And yet people still struggle with that and allow these folks to sit on their overhead. So what advice or how do you help contractors work through that challenge of letting people go in a recession when perhaps you might feel a little bit of guilt because this person may not be able to find another job somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a fear that prevents a lot of people from hiring in the first place, especially people who went through 2008. If you've ever had to sit across the table from somebody and say, look, I know you quit a job to come to work for me. Maybe you moved. Maybe you came here and bought a house, uprooted your family to come work here. And now I'm having to tell you, got to let you go. That's tough. That's something people want to avoid. How do you handle that? I think one of the best things to do is to take the emotion out of it, take the fear and the emotion out of it. There are a couple of things you can do that come to mind. One would be to go ahead and create your playbook. The military has these, they don't call them playbooks, but if something happens, they have an SOP for it. They pull it off the shelf. this is the situation. Let's just grab the playbook off the shelf. This is what we're going to do. So now is the time to start preparing that playbook, the if-then statements. So if the bank account or revenue or something achieves this milestone, then we have to take action. And this is what we're going to do. So you make those plans in advance, because in the moment is not the time to make those plans, because your judgment will be clouded by emotion and fear, all of these things. If you've never gone through financial crisis, good for you. But there's a lot of emotion, a lot of stuff that goes on when people's livelihood comes back. It depends on you. So make a plan in advance that says, this is our playbook. When this happens, here's what we're going to do. And then the other thing would be to preempt that situation and to come up with a plan that answers the question, what would it take to make this work? What would it take to keep the team intact? There's a financial number, and then start asking the question. This is what I call right to left thinking. You start with the outcome you want, and then you work from right to left, work backwards and reverse engineer a solution that gets you there. So what would it take to keep everybody busy? And then what would it take for that? What would that take? And then be transparent with the team and let them know, okay, guys, this is what winning looks like. All right. You mentioned C players. If you have A players, B players, C players, this is what winning looks like. We want everybody to win, but this is what winning looks like. So one of the questions is, probably need to get rid of my C players, but then how do I know who my C players are? And if you don't have any measurables to measure their performance by, then it's this subjective, emotional gut feeling, and you might cut the wrong person for the wrong reason. So having measurables and clearly identifying, what does winning look like for a superintendent? What does winning look like for a project manager? What does winning look like for your director of sales? And having clearly defined measurables so they'll know what winning looks like, and then you'll have a measuring stick to compare their performance against to know, all right, do we have an A player? Do we have a B player? Do we have a C player? Who's not pulling their weight here?
That's very interesting. I really like that idea of the if-then statement, so that when an event triggers in my business, I know what to do, not based on my emotion, but based on prior thought. I think it's also interesting that the first instinct of a lot of contractors is to cut people and cut overhead during the recession. But our most valuable resource, like you said earlier, is our people. So sometimes we really do need to get creative so that my A and B players stick around while I may be moving my C players on down the road.
Yeah. The key really is to have a plan and then have some data to make decisions based on. Make decisions based on data. Don't make short-term decisions, because if you cut somebody, let go of a project manager, and that project manager can manage $5 million or $10 million of work for you, it's going to be tough to get them back. So really the best answer, and this is it's late advice, good advice, too late. The best answer is prepare. And so perhaps the best advice would be, hey, it's going to happen again. It is going to happen again. So as soon as you get through this, commit to yourself that you're going to make a plan, and you're going to get yourself in a position where you can look at the next recession as a good thing, and you know it's coming.
Okay, so then let's summarize then, Todd. Perhaps I've been not quite as diligent in building up my cash reserves. Perhaps I do have that. I've been smoking the hopium, and I'm seeing my backlog start to dwindle, and there's all these red flag warnings. Give us 2 or 3 action items that we can take right away to become a little more confident, to begin to recession-proof my business. 2
things. Number 1 would be to attack profit bleeds in your business. So you have work under contract, you have it in backlog. So your job at the most basic level is to convert that backlog into revenue, into profit, really. Convert backlog into profit. At the profit bleeds. Some of the most common profit bleeds are rework. If you have hourly employees, lost productivity is a killer, absolutely killer. So look at your productivity and ask, really specifically, ask, what can we do to eliminate 15 minutes of wasted time a day?
Okay, so hold on. That's why 15 minutes? Tell me why 15 minutes.
It's a more useful question than a question like, hey, why aren't you guys more productive? Or what's it going to take for you to be more productive? That's one that points the finger at them. Two, it's really vague. But if you ask a question that starts with the words, what would it take? It gets them thinking solutions. And you might even ask, what can we do to help save you 15 minutes a day? Now, if you want to have an interesting exercise, get your team together and ask this question: what would it take to do fill in the blank in 1/10 of the time? If it normally takes 2 weeks to rough in a floor, for example, or to complete the metal stud framing for a floor, what would it take to get it done if it takes 2 weeks normally, what would it take to get it done in 1 day? And people are going to say, oh, it's impossible. You can't do that. But once you get through all of that stuff, you'll probably come up with one idea that'll allow you to trim 10% of the time off.
There you go. So you make an extreme statement to get their attention and then say, let's just work through it, guys. They generate a list of ideas and maybe 1 or 2 ideas really pop that can then give you an incremental improvement.
Yeah, you will probably never get it down to 10%. But if you get it down to 90%, that's huge. If you cut the schedule time by 10%, that's good. So engage your team. Look at profit bleeds, identify the biggest profit bleeds. You may have some data to figure that out. You may not. If you're not sure where to start, look at lost productivity, do the things we just talked about. Look at rework or extra trips. I should probably say this one first, but if your revenue producing people are picking up materials, driving to the supply house, picking up materials, Home Depot, Lowe's, plumbing supply, etc. If your revenue producing people are picking up materials, stop that immediately. That is the number one profit bleed. It's not a profit bleed. It is a profit gusher, especially for smaller businesses.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's good. And you'd be surprised how many larger businesses do that as well.
Yeah, where the superintendent is going out to pick stuff up. Look at giveaways. You're doing work, but you're not getting paid, either because the change order didn't get processed in the timely manner. You're doing work on a ticket, you're not following proper change control processes, and you're going to end up eating that cost. So that's a huge profit bleed. And then schedule overruns are enormous, absolutely enormous. So step number 1, look at your profit bleeds. Where do you have profit bleeding out that you can stick your fingers in and keep that money? It is one of the processes I go through when we talk to contractors is a profit bleed triage. And it's not unusual by the time we get through this for a company to say, holy cow, that's terrifying how much money is bleeding out every day, every minute. And because they have the work, the profit's there, but it's just bleeding out. And if you start plugging those holes, then it's going to help with your cash flow. You're going to start building up that war chest. Lots of good things happen. So number 1, attack profit bleeds. Focus on the bottom line. Number 2 is lead your team well. They're watching the same news. They're reading the same stories. They're concerned about their job. So lead your team well. Tell them, be clear. This is what the most important things are. These are the big priorities. This is what you need to be focused on right now. And keep them engaged. Be transparent with them. Tell them what's going on, but lead the team well. Keep them focused on what's most important. Keep them looking forward. Positive reinforcement. Recognize good behavior, good things they're doing, and resist the urge to go hide in your office and stick your head in the sand. Believe me, I tried that, and that doesn't work for anybody. But lead your team. That's what they need from you. They're scared, and they need to be led.
Let me ask you about that specifically, because I know just in my many years working with contractors that a lot of the guys and gals who are actually the owners of the company, one of the reasons they've been successful is because they're naturally skeptical. They really have an eagle eye on risk. And at times they can be very pessimistic, and they wear that as a badge of honor because they're not going to get hosed by anyone. Okay. And when times are tough, it can be really challenging for a leader to project the necessary optimism that you are describing. So what can a leader do if they're naturally pessimistic to manage that so that they're projecting that necessary optimism in the midst of challenging times?
Yeah, that's a great question. Ultimately, it's a choice. you have to understand, we have to understand that we get to choose how we respond to things, right? We get to choose. It's not what happens to you, it's the story you tell yourself about what it means. So controlling, probably the first step would be to get in control of what's going on in your head. The most successful CEOs and people who navigate choppy waters of recession and lead companies through that, they are positive. I heard a study recently. They looked at CEOs who led their companies during a recession, and they found that the companies that lost market share and didn't do well, I think they analyzed their press releases and transcripts from the investor calls and that sort of thing. And they had an incredibly high number of negative words and words that indicated blaming somebody else. So they didn't take responsibility, they didn't take blame, they were very negative, they're looking like the problem's out there. The successful CEOs used words like opportunity, and they were positive, and they were forward looking. And did they feel that? I don't know. But as the leader, their job was to project that, to be intentional about the messages they wanted to put out there, and say, to really keep the team positive and moving forward, not blowing smoke up their skirt or anything like that, but just being positive. So it really is, it comes back to the head games that we play. Is you have to get control of your mindset, you have to get control of your thoughts, you have to be intentional about what you think about, and then be intentional about what you say.
And it's interesting because I do think that goes back to the earlier conversation about the war chest, because I know for me, I'm naturally a pessimist. I'm always waiting for the other foot to drop. But when my war chest is solid, then even though things aren't going well in the macro sense, and I may need to pivot on a micro sense, the anxiety levels that I might have are diminished radically, because I know, hey, at the end of the day, I've got some cash on hand and I can get through the choppy waters.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nothing provides peace of mind like a war chest, financial security. And that gives you the confidence to make moves, confidence to know, hey, we're going to be okay. So yeah, there are a lot of different things that need to happen. Unfortunately, it's tough to do, maybe impossible to do some of these things right now. It's tough to grow your war chest, but now's the time to commit that you're going to get through this. Here's the thing. You get to decide the story you're going to tell yourself about this. So there was a Navy fighter pilot who was shot down over Vietnam, and his name escapes me right now. It may come back to me, but he was a prisoner of war for 7 years. He was tortured, beaten, and he was interviewed afterward, and they asked him, how did you do it? He said, during that time, I told myself, this is going to be the defining moment of my life right now, being in this brutally beaten and tortured as a prisoner of war, paraded in front of TV cameras as propaganda. This is going to be the defining moment of my life. So you get to choose the story you tell yourself. You can either choose a negative story that will very likely become a self-fulfilling prophecy, or you can tell yourself a positive story that we're going to get through this. This is good. We're learning things. Find the good in it and really focus on the outcome you want. And that's what your team needs. That's what you need. That's what your customers need. Unfortunately, it's all too rare. The natural thing is to be negative, but that's what people need. They need somebody to lead them through this.
So I think it's really neat to be able to see these times of adversity as times of tremendous opportunity, but then also tremendous responsibility, both to look at the blocking and tackling aspects of my business, that those profit bleeds that you so well described, and to manage myself so that I'm showing up every day, either at the job site or in the office, with that optimistic outlook that we are going to get through this and we're going to do it together, and that me as the leader, I have that responsibility.
Absolutely.
Todd, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. So the name of my company is the Construction Leading Edge. And what we do is we help companies, typically construction companies, general contractors, home builders, remodelers, generally under $50 million a year. We help them systematize their business so they can take it to the next level. They can scale. They can eliminate profit bleeds, maybe so they can just take a vacation, get the systems in place so they can sell it one day, transfer it over to their kids or key employees. And we help them put some crucial systems in place so that their business becomes, as we like to say, a source of freedom, source of impact, and a source of wealth.
That's tremendous. And who would you say is your ideal client? Like, who's the person listening right now who should go out to your website and contact you?
Yeah, great question. So the people we work with typically are general contractors, business owners who are general contractors, custom home builders, spec home builders, remodelers. They've been in business for a few years. They have a team, but they've hit this wall or hit this ceiling of complexity. And they're saying things like, I'm working way too many hours, 70 hours a week. The business consumes more of my life than it should. We're not really making the money we should. I have to step in and deal with all these day-to-day details. I spend all of my time firefighting and being in reactive mode. Our team is stressed. Something has to change. So if that's you, then the best thing I can do for you is say, go watch our free training. We have a webinar called How to Get Out of Your Business, How to Make It Run Without You. You'll learn some key strategies, some crucial systems you can put in place to have a business that runs without you. And you can go to constructionleadingedge.com/get out, GETOUT. Watch our free training there. And we have quite a few other resources on our website at constructionleadingedge.com.
Awesome. And of course, you have a kick-ass podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's the Construction Leading Edge podcast. It's out there on every podcast player imaginable.
That's beautiful. Todd, I appreciate the generosity that you've shown us here today, taking your time to speak with us. I know there's a tremendous number of takeaways that are very practical that people can immediately put to use. I really do appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on here, and thanks for all the work that you're doing, Eric. It's good stuff.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to my interview with Todd today. I hope you got tremendous value from that. I know I found it very enjoyable. Feel free to check out Todd's website, constructionleadingedge.com. Listen to his podcast and make sure that you are ready for the recession. You can take practical steps based on what we've discussed in today's interview to make sure that your business is recession-proof. And I have a quick request. Feel free to share this podcast with other people that you think would benefit from it. And also, if you could go out to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts and give the show a rating or a review, that would be tremendous. I'm just looking here. We have 125 ratings, a 4.9 out of 5-star rating. It's just tremendous. It's really, really awesome. And I'd really appreciate it if you could go out, if you haven't already, and give the show a rating and a review. It just helps us to get seen across the internet. And then one final thing. I know I mentioned it earlier in the episode, but my book, Construction Genius, effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. This is a tremendous value. The paperback's $20. Get one for you and for everyone on your leadership team. You can go to Amazon. There's links in the show notes so that you can click on those links, go to Amazon, get copies of the book. I know construction companies at the moment, what they're doing is they're distributing this to their leadership team, and they're going chapter by chapter through the book, and they're reading a chapter, and then they're discussing it in their leadership meetings. That's a great way to leverage this tool, leverage the information packed in here to really help your construction company grow and prosper. So thanks again for listening to Construction Genius, and I'll catch you on the next episode.